Ano ai me ke aloha e na makamaka, and welcome to A Second Glance, where we take an in-depth look at issues in and around Hawaii, and especially the rest of the world as we get into this program, the preparation for the crash. Let me put it this way. I've heard, obviously I wasn't there, that when the Titanic, that ship that could not be sunk, some people said even God cannot sink the Titanic. And yet you and I know exactly what had happened. It was an iceberg that sank the Titanic. But that ship that could not sink, sank. And before it sank, and people knew that it had hit the iceberg and it was taken in water, it is said that people at the top deck simply did not know what else to do. So many of them ended up straightening chairs at the top deck around the swimming pool. And as we look back, we ask ourselves, what possessed them to not prepare for the sinking? But of course the question is, what do you do to prepare? Do you construct new lifeboats? And one would say, well, that's impossible. And do you now learn how to swim? And if you do, how to keep warm while you're in ice-cold water. So these are trying times, but certainly fixing chairs or realigning chairs is not going to solve the problem. The belief that the Titanic could not crash or could not sink, and the situation that we now face, or we are now in the middle of, is somewhat similar. We are seeing an empire collapse. We don't want to believe it, just as many on the Titanic could not believe that it could sink. We do not want to believe that the U.S. empire can collapse, because after all, like what the British Empire once was, an empire where the sun never sets, the American empire is not only that, but it has colonies throughout the world, and it has military bases throughout the world. And it has an influence that covers the globe. Not only is the military so ever-present, but the culture of the United States and the standards by which the Americans have gone across the world to talk about the highlights of American democracy, liberalism, and the rest have spread around the world. And to see or to even suggest that the U.S. as a nation and its influence, not as a nation, as an empire, is collapsing is equally as unbelievable as the Titanic. So my question then becomes, for those who claim to be leaders of the larger society, or of a community, or even of a family, what is the role of leadership in preparation for an unwanted, perhaps, but an inevitable collapse? Well, first of all, you have to determine whether or not this collapse is real or not. Or is it only Poka Laenui who is like suggesting that the Titanic can collapse or can sink before it sank? Other comparisons can also be made. But rather than listening to the few voices, what perhaps we can all do is become more aware of the circumstances under which we are living. And it's not so secretive that we cannot pierce through the shading that the general or corporate media puts out to the rest of us, always coming out with a sweet story, trying to sugarcoat the bad parts of the story. Let's take, for example, just the American economy and how it is in failure. Even Standards and Poor has now downgraded the economy from a AAA to a AA plus, which is shaking the very foundation of the economy and investments that require a AAA rating before you can invest in bonds, which means that all of these people are going to have to remove their bonds from wherever it is because of this down rating in Standard and Poor. Major trembling of the economic situation, notwithstanding what Mr. Barack Obama says and his assurance from Warren Buffett that the American economy, he would give it 4 A's if it was possible. Well, he's not one of those major raters who many corporate policies require that you follow in your investment policies. Okay, so we see this happening not only in the American economy, and it's not only in the rating, but you look at the situation with regards to the jobs and with regards to the whole issue of taxation. There's simply not enough revenues that is coming in to the American government to pay out for its expenses. They don't want to take a look at the military costs. They don't want to open up the question of taxing the rich and all of those things. So there's a mess of problems. And in the foreseeable future, it's very questionable how the United States can continue to maintain all of these expensive services, including the health services, including the education services, with the limited resources that's coming in. On the other hand, people are saying, well, you know, the United States, through its Marshall Plan and many other plans, have been so benevolent to other countries, and now it is time that we called in all of our foreign aid and we ask other countries to assist the United States in its time of trouble. It would actually be a workable plan if the U.S. foreign aid was a major component of U.S. expenditures, which it is not. And oftentimes those foreign aids are not really aid to foreign countries, but aid to American businesses operating in foreign countries, in which there is a guarantee that these foreign countries will contract with American businesses. So it's been sort of an underhanded way of funding American companies. But if you look at what has happened in Europe, you find that not only is the American empire collapsing, and we are finding that many of the nations in Europe, not all of them, but most of them, are also in the same or worse condition than the United States. You have riots in London, and they have no basis of explaining the riots that are occurring there. You have the situation in Greece and Italy, that things are falling apart, and they don't know how to recover, and many other places. I'm not going to recite all of those different events. So you cannot look to Europe. Now, where else do you look to? Who else has money to be able to survive and support and uplift the American empire? Well, to be honest with you, nobody else wants to uplift the American empire. The country that seems to be doing quite well, or countries that seem to be doing quite well, are South America, as well as China. Okay. But those are not really countries who would want to continue with the American empire. You've heard of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine is an American policy that essentially says all you other countries respect the sovereign integrity of the United States and respect our Monroe Doctrine, which says that we have province over Central and South America. So you folks keep out of this area and you will be safe from us. Of course, the Central and South Americans are saying, well, who the heck is the United States to suggest that we should all respect the sovereign integrity of all countries, including especially the United States. But when it comes to Central and South America, forget it. It's the Americans who have the right to intervene and have intervened into these areas historically. So they're not very happy. And you can hear, if you read carefully what is happening with within the news, they're not very happy with the U.S. interventions, and they're not going to waste too many tears or dollars to try to support the empires that the United States have tried to extend into Central and South America. Where else do you turn to? Well, you can try Canada. Well, Canada isn't all that helpful. They are also facing some of their difficulties. And the other country that always associates with the United States, Australia and New Zealand, and you're not going to find any very overly excited reception there. So, where do you turn to? Well, perhaps if we recall that in just about the Second World War, how the United States were supplying forces to China to resist the invasion by Japan, and there were a lot of that history going on, secret support that was going on in that area. I don't think you can depend on that, because it was Americans who also supported Chiang Kai-shek in his attempt to hold on to power when Mao Zedong was making his charges against Chiang Kai-shek and eventually chased him off to Taiwan, or what was known as Formosa as well. And even till this day, the United States is saying, although we recognize a one China policy, and that is, it is a mainland China that is a real China, and no longer do we recognize Taiwan as being the center and the periphery being mainland China. And this great change took place during the Nixon administration. But the United States is still saying that while we recognize a one China policy and we respect the sovereign integrity of China, we are willing to sell weapons to Taiwan. What it all builds up to, and I'm not saying whether or not the policy is correct or incorrect, what it all builds up to, however, is that the communist China, which some people today debate whether or not it really is communist or not, is probably the fastest growing economy in the world. It has essentially monopolized this idea of what is called rare minerals, rare earth. These minerals that are going to be so important in the next they're already very important, and it's going to increase in importance in the next 5 to 10 years, such that it will control the development of new technologies. What the Chinese are saying is that we are going to restrict the amount of trade in these minerals to what nations we trade with. And because we have the monopoly, and they have gone across the world looking for where there are new discoveries of these 5 minerals, and they have bought up or tried to buy up the mines that have discovered it. What the Chinese are saying is essentially this. Well, what they're saying is we will not trade for the next 3 years, and we're going to allow one of our Chinese companies to research, develop, and create new ways of using these materials. And after that has been done in the next 3 years, then we are going to open up our markets to the other countries of the world. If I may hop very quickly to a discussion of economics and just make a comparison between 2 types of economics. One is first world economics, the other is third world economics. Okay. Now, in terms of economics, let me give you an example. You have raw materials, and you have additive to the raw materials, which is the impact of culture of people onto the raw materials. Third world economics is we will sell you our raw materials, whether it's wood or cane or minerals. We will sell it to you, and then you take it into your country, you develop it, you place the impact of culture, and you make something, and then you sell it back. Now, you didn't really invest anything other than human intelligence and sweat to create this entity. but now you sell it back and you've increased the price. Let me give you an example of something specific. You can either choose automobiles or you can choose, let's say, a painting. Let's take the Mona Lisa. The actual material that makes up the Mona Lisa may come up to what, $10. You got paint, you got canvas, you got a frame. Okay. The actual value of the Mona Lisa, I don't know what the value is. But let's say $500,000, $1 million, maybe 10 times more than that. What is the difference between the paint and canvas and wood as opposed to the finished product, the Mona Lisa? It is that impact of culture upon nature that has skyrocketed. So that's first world economy as opposed to just selling the raw materials, third world economy. Okay. The Chinese are saying with these rare materials or minerals, what we will do is we will not continue to practice third world economic practices. We are not going to ship our raw materials to the United States and have them develop the patents and new technologies using our raw material. No. For the next 3 years, it will be our developers, it will be our engineers, it will be our scientists who will be working to patent it. So what they are saying is that we have the materials, we have the intelligence, and this is the economy we're going to follow. Now, it puts a lot of the Americans and many others in a very bad attitude with regards to the Chinese. But after all, where did they learn how to do that? It was from the models and in, examples as set by the Americans and other colonial countries that had abused the Chinese for many, many years. So the situation has changed so that when the president of China goes out of country to offer his support for the economic crisis that is going on, where does he go to? No, he does not follow the path that the Dalai Lama followed in coming to the United States to talk in a small room, in a back room, with the President of the United States. What he does is he goes to France, he goes to European countries, and he negotiates with them and says, well, you know, the Chinese people may be willing to assist and perhaps we can extend trade and do this, this, and that. But it is not, it is to the European countries that at least is willing to make a gesture. The extent of the gesture is questionable, but there's a gesture there, there's something there. With the United States, there's no real gesture except a protest to the United States that you have just committed a second, what do they call it, faux pas, diplomacy by with the Dalai Lama and the rest. That's another issue that we could talk about, but I won't skip to that issue right now. The point is that the American empire is sinking. I've just covered some of the economic situations. You can take a look at the military situation yourself. They have bases all over the world, and they are not able to maintain those bases. And yet, it is that drive to maintain bases and extend bases that is part of the reason for being in Afghanistan and in other areas. So this military drive, this attempt to continue to be the policeman of the world, not only the policeman of the world, but to drive the military in this symbol of the twin powers, the flag and the cross, to lead the way so that capitalism can follow and open up new markets. That has been the general trend of the United States, but it's not working anymore. That driving force is one of the major reasons why the U.S. is today collapsing, because of not only the casualties that are occurring in these areas that they are killing off people and the rest, but when they come home, the people who are casualties, if you listen to the Veterans Administration and you look at how many people have died out of depleted uranium, for example, as a result of the war in Iraq, the first Iraq invasion. You have more people killed from depleted uranium after returning home, and the the after effects to the children of these service personnel is far more than the people killed in battle or far more than the Americans killed in battle, and it's costing a tremendous amount. So although they are using numbers on the battlefield, they are not doing an appropriate count as to what it's really costing at home. So that's the military side. We've already talked about the economic decline. You have the military decline, just the international stature of the United States is in total decline. So as you travel around the world in different countries, what do you hear? Oh, you're an American? Why did the American do this, do that? And why are they violating human rights in Guantanamo Bay, in Abu Ghraib, and in other places, and yet claim that other nations should respect and not engage in torture? And then you turn to, what do you turn to? The tortured language that this lawyer, Yu, had said that, well, waterboarding is not torture because it didn't destroy or impair a major organ in a person's body, and that is the measure of torture. Everybody laughs at that kind of reasoning. The only thing that is truly and very clearly tortured is reason being used by this American lawyer to the American president. What happened there? The President of the United States, in that case George Bush, was simply shopping around for the best opinion he could get and used that to protect himself from being accused later on of committing war crimes. Whether or not he gets away with it is beside the point. It influences how other people see the United States and are essentially saying that the Americans, you are hypocrites. You have certain values which are highly respected, which should be respected. The integrity of all human beings, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, essentially an American-led document by Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, where the United Nations, everyone, not a single vote was against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And yet with that very declaration, you see the constant violation by the United States of America to that declaration. You take it into one of the domestic courts of the United States, and you use that as a basis of defense. And what do? They laugh at you. They say, oh, international law doesn't apply to our domestic courts. Then what is the role of international law? Is it not the case where the United States Supreme Court has previously ruled in a very early part of the formation of the United States that the laws of all civilized nations are obligated to follow international law? And the United States need to recognize international law. Now, to take that and say, yes, we recognize that principle, but we're more interested in our personal interests, and we're going to elevate that above these principles. Other foreigners are looking at it and laughing at the United States for this kind of contradictions. And that brings down the empire of the United States. So you find that in the moral collapse of the United States, you find the economic collapse of the United States, you find the military collapse of the United States. I am saying that that empire that could not collapse is now in collapse. And just as the British Empire that could not collapse is in collapse, or the Roman Empire. But the real point is, so what? What do we do? Where do we go from there? Where do we have the leadership in our community to tell us that all of the stuff that we have been told, that we need to depend on the global economic system? Now, are you saying that no, it's sustainability that we need to depend on? We need to be assured of a way of survival here in Hawaii, and how we need to begin the conversion of our resources. Is that what is being said? I'm saying, don't let the quote, political leadership get away with failing to lead. And that is exactly what is happening now. It's like they're on the Titanic. They don't know what to do, so they're avoiding the issue of the sinking of the ship. Perhaps we should take a look at how we have aligned the chairs on the top deck. Or let's find some other make use or make work models to work with. That is not going to work. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when we find the system collapsing, when our health system collapses and our economic system collapses or education system collapses, what kind of society do we have to bring it back up again? How do we survive and re-emerge as a healthy, well society? The governor, in his recent campaign, had campaigned for a new day in in Hawaii. But that's all you hear. What is the program for that new day? And I'm suggesting that he is not familiar enough with the paradigms that we have now and need to shift from. You see, the whole basis upon which the American society and those in Hawaii has been built upon has been based on three fundamental deep culture pillars. It has been based, whether we're dealing with the environment, whether we're dealing with our economic system, our health system, and all of that, it's based on domination, individualism, and exclusion, D-I-E. If we are going to survive, we cannot lead a community on D-I-E. It is prophetic of where we're taking that community. It has to be based on, instead of domination, olu-olu, working with one another in a compatible relationship. Instead of individualism, we have to think about lokahi. We have to think about the group and the care of that group. Instead of exclusion, we have to think about aloha. How we treat our environment, how we treat our economic relations with our neighbors and friends, how we deal with education services, political management, and all of this has to shift from die to ola. And then we need to work the particulars on how we're going to survive. That's all the time I have. I want to thank you very much for allowing me into your homes. Aloha Hawaii, ahui ho.
Kaulana nā pua o Hawaii, Tūpa'a mahope o ka aina, Iki mai ka elele o ka loko i